The wisest men in the Bible. Number 1. Joseph. When the story begins, Joseph, Jacob's son, is 17 years old. Jacob, his father, plays favorites and prefers Joseph over his brothers. This lays the groundwork for years of hatred. Genesis 37:4. All his brothers hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Then Joseph had a dream in which his brothers and parents bowed down to him, and the text says his brothers hated him even more. So when his brothers see him approaching them in the field, they decide to slay him. Reuben saves Joseph from their clutches, and instead of slaying him, they sell him into slavery, and he ends up in Egypt. Potiphar buys Joseph as a slave, and God blesses him with success, allowing him to become the trusted manager of the entire house. Even though he was a slave, God was with him. Joseph's life exemplifies the sponge's lesson. When you fill a sponge with water and then apply pressure, water comes out. Joseph was so full of God's presence that evidence of his devotion to God oozed out when life squeezed him, and he rose to prominence. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Genesis 39:3. Notice that Potiphar didn't just see Joseph's good work ethic, he saw that the Lord was with him. That suggests Joseph didn't mind telling Potiphar about the Lord, because how else would Potiphar have known about him? Because Joseph knew God was with him, he rose to the position of the best employee in Potiphar's household. Potiphar gave him authority over everything he owned, and the Lord blessed everything he owned in his house and in the fields. Thus, Joseph demonstrates how we should all act when working with and for non-Christians. We should be the most punctual, productive, trustworthy, and honest employees in our organizations. Knowing that God is with us should make us stand out. Joseph became so important to Potiphar's business that Potiphar essentially gave him the keys to his estate. For Joseph, things were starting to look up. But then Potiphar's wife got involved. She wanted to seduce Joseph because he was well-built and attractive. Her advances were also not subtle. She got right to the point when she said, "Come to bed with me." Joseph responded wisely to Potiphar's wife's request. His reaction serves as a model for the wisdom of how we should resist sexual or other forms of temptation. First, he recognized that the consequences of sin would be disastrous. Potiphar had delegated authority over all of his possessions to Joseph. Unfortunately, Potiphar's wife was obstinate. She continued to speak with Joseph despite his rejection of her advances. Then, when no one was looking, she grabbed his garment and said, "Sleep with me." With greater success comes greater levels of trust, which, in turn, leads to more unguarded vulnerability. F.B. Meyer writes insightfully about the latter. We may expect temptation in the days of prosperity and ease, rather than in those of privation and toil. We learn more about his wisdom in the book of Acts. Acts 7:9-10, New King James Version. And the patriarchs, becoming envious, sold Joseph into Egypt. But God was with him and delivered him out of all his troubles, and gave him favor and wisdom in the presence of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. This is exactly what God can do when we trust him in our detours. All of Joseph's experiences, from being a well-off kid to becoming a slave in Egypt, can be traced back to a dream that he had. Great leaders have dreams, inspiring visions of the future that motivate and empower their teams and organizations. Whenever a dream is born, it goes through a process until it is realized. You will have both good and terrible days as you progress through the process. You will be confronted with a tough choice on a regular basis. Should you quit or keep going? Your inspiration can be found in Joseph's example of never giving up on your dreams. Number 2. Daniel. Daniel has 3 syllables, each of which has a meaning in Hebrew. The word Dan means judge. The middle E stands for my, and the L stands for God. So Daniel's name translates as God my judge, or God is my judge. Having a name to live up to is a wonderful thing. Daniel exceeded his expectations in a spectacular way. He lived a life that screamed, God is my judge, not man. God is my judge, not any Babylonian or Persian king. I will have to account to God for how I live my life, not to Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, or Darius. God is my ultimate judge. In other words, God was at the center of his life. It was founded on God, and his perspective on the world was infused with God. This is evident in how he ate, how he interpreted dreams, how he wrote his book, and how he prayed. Remember that Daniel was among the captives taken to Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem. He and others were chosen to be trained for service in the royal palace and fed the king's finest food and wine. Daniel, on the other hand, saw his food as a divine issue. Everything was a God thing for him. Daniel looked to God, not the king, to decide his case. The end result, according to 1:17, was that God gave him learning and skill in all letters and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. The way he interpreted dreams. The same God-centered way of life shines through in Daniel's interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and his son Belshazzar's vision. In Daniel 2:28, for example, he gives all credit to God. And he accuses the world's most powerful rulers of arrogance and treason against God. For example, to Belshazzar in Daniel 5:23, instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Take a look at Daniel's incredible reaction to Darius's decree against prayer. Let's take a look at the situation. Verse 3. An excellent spirit was in him, and he excelled above the others, and the king planned to put him above the others and over the whole kingdom. Daniel had an incredibly successful future ahead of him, with all the power, prestige, wealth, and freedom he could have wished for. This, however, made him a target for jealousy and envy. So the other presidents and satraps persuaded Darius to pass a law that stated that "Whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions." In other words, Daniel's prayer life was so well known and established as a part of his character that his enemies knew this was one place they could count on him not whimpering. And they were completely correct. Number 3. Stephen. The man that had the face of an angel. Acts 6:15. Luke tells the story of Stephen, the first Christian martyr, in the book of Acts. In Acts 6:1-7, Stephen was one of 7 leaders chosen to serve as deacons. Acts 6:10, New King James Version. And they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. Stephen debated with individuals from the synagogue. Empowered by the Holy Spirit, he showed greater wisdom than his opponents. They were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. There is no evidence to suggest that Stephen was inherently more intelligent, better educated, or a superior debater than the Jews he was debating against. We should attribute his upper hand in the debate to the spirit by which he spoke. Soon after, Stephen was arrested and charged with blasphemy against Moses and God. Stephen stands before the high court, not trembling in fear or outrage, but in calm confidence, glowing with divine inspiration. Luke describes the extraordinary scene. All who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like the face of an angel. Acts 6:15. When Stephen was appointed as a deacon, Luke described him as a man of good repute, full of the spirit of wisdom. Acts 6:3. And full of faith and of the Holy Spirit. Acts 6:5. When Luke described Stephen as having the face of an angel, he was preparing the scene for Stephen's martyrdom. The vocabulary induces awe. All those who looked upon Stephen were touched with awe and wonder at his appearance. Something about Stephen's demeanor prompted comparisons to an angel who stands in God's presence and reflects his glory. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked upon to heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Luke observed moments before Stephen was stoned to death. Acts 7:55. Possessing an angel-like countenance was a term frequently found in Judaism. It was used to illustrate a brightened, enlightened, spellbinding, or awe-inspiring appearance. Wisdom, according to Ecclesiastes 8:1, lights up a person's face. NLT. When Stephen stood before his accusers, glowing with the face of an angel, he radiated God's wisdom and the glory of heaven. Without saying a word, Stephen's countenance testified that he was the Lord's faithful servant. Those Sanhedrin members should have remembered Moses' gleaming face.
In closing, our question for the day: what's a worship song that has helped you feel closer to God?